So I thought that I'd go into detail on how I met Kurt and Krist. It kind of goes back pretty far, and it's a long story, so I understand if you get bored and want to turn it off. So we're going to rewind to 1984, and I was in a band called Noxious Fumes, a punk band in Tacoma. I was only 14. In Olympia there was a place called the Tropicana, and we used to play quite a bit down there. Now at the same time the Melvins were just starting to play shows, and the Melvins were one of the opening bands that would always be at the Tropicana. So a bunch of shows back then that the Melvins would come down and play, there'd be this tall dude with them, like roadieing for them. There was one time when he played, which was Krist. I didn't know Krist very well back then. I met him. I met him a few more times as the years went on. And Noxious Fumes, we played with the Melvins a few, like probably 10 times or so between gigs in Seattle, Tacoma, which in Tacoma back then it was pretty much just a place called the Hell House, where Noxious Fumes practiced, and Girl Trouble, and that was kind of the home base. And there was one time when they played a bunch of Mentor songs, and they opened a show, and Chris was on bass. So that's when I met Chris initially. Back in 1984, 1985, about the same time Noxious Fumes was going on, my brother was in a band called The Grind. And the singer of The Grind was a guy named Kurt Flansburgh. And Tracy Miranda, they were really good friends. Tracy and Kurt Flansburgh. Anyway, so The Grind practiced in my bedroom in Fircrest. Tracy would come over, hang out while the band practiced, and of course I was always there. I was our family home. Anyway, became friends with Tracy. So now we fast forward 3 more years, and I used to go to shows at the Community Rural Theater and play shows there. I was in another band called Subvert at that point, and we used to play a bunch of shows there. But I went to one show, and I think my brother's band was playing, another band my brother was in called Soylent Green, and I walked in, and Skid Row was playing, and I didn't know who they were, and I sat there, and there's the roadie for the Melvins playing bass, and it's Chris, but I probably didn't remember his name at that point, and I remember like just really instantly liking the songs. Like, the songs were super cool. I sat down and I watched the whole set, which is weird because I pretty much mostly into like punk and crossover metal back then, so to be blown away by something completely different, it seemed pretty, I don't know, off from what I was usually into. But I remember, they were really good. And after they were done, I approached Kurt and probably introduced myself or whatever, and asked him if he had a tape. I remember him saying they were going to record. He was going to record something, and they should have a recording soon. So I go forward. I'd have to look at the timeline exactly. It would have been probably a few months after that Skid Row show. My band Subvert was playing at a show called the Thrash Fest, and after we were done playing, Kurt and Krist come up to me and they're just talking about the show, and they're like, "Hey man, great set, whatever," and they asked me if I wanted to jam with them. At that time I was really dedicated to the band that I was in, and I was pretty much like, it'd be fun to jam, but I'm already in this band or whatever. So that night, there's a party in Olympia at Mike Nelson's. The Thrash Fest, Mike Nelson from Fits of Depression, I think that was the first show his band played. I'm almost positive about that night. So anyway, a bunch of people went down to Olympia, and we were hanging out, and Kurt came up to me again. He was like, dude, come jam with us, man. Kurt gave me his number, wanted to keep in contact, and he really wanted to find a drummer. And that night, too, I think Tracy was with Kurt, and so at that point is when I kept in contact with Kurt. He just seemed like a cool guy anyway, So I went to Stadium High School, and I'm sitting outside outside the Stadium Bowl there, and a friend comes up to me, another punk musician in town, punk rock friend, Simon Smith, and he had borrowed this tape from Jim May, which was the first. It was basically the demo they recorded with Dale, but it's the one that was recorded at Reciprocal. And he lets me listen to it, and I'm just like fucking floored. I mean, that is like the most incredible recording. To this day, it's still my favorite Nirvana recording. In its entirety, like the whole 10 songs, I still consider it like the first Nirvana album. So I would suggest highly, if you get all the songs, about 10 or 11 of them from that recording. I could probably name a lot of them right now. There would be like Hairspray Queen, Downer, Floyd the Barber, Paper Cuts, Is It Me, All My Attitude. I forget what that song's called, but that one. Let's see, Spank Through, Pen Cap Chew. I'm forgetting. I know there's like Aero Zeppelin. I think there's a couple more. Anyway, all those songs in the entirety is what that tape was. And I still have a copy of it. Anyway, so I heard that. Simon wouldn't let me borrow it. So I called Kurt, and I told him that I heard the tape that he recorded with Dale. And see, this is what they had asked me to play. Play in the band. I mean, I was like right at that point where I could have been the drummer on that tape, but I was in another band. I didn't have time to. Anyway, whatever. So, Kurt. Okay, so let's see. Right before that, I'd actually seen them play with Dale. So it was the same night that they recorded that tape. And then I had heard it there at my high school. And then I had called Kurt and asked him if I could get a copy of it. So he did make me a copy and gave it to me the next show, which the other dude played drums. I think it was the first Nirvana show at Community World Theater. And at that point, I had some friends that I knew that were drummers in town. I put in contact with Kurt. One guy, he was an amazing drummer. It just, I think Kurt talked to him, a guy named Kevin Lloyd, and Kevin talked about being into speed metal too much, and I think Kurt felt like he thought the guy probably wasn't into the right type of music. But the guy was the right type of drummer, really, really heavy, good drummer. Anyway, yeah, put all those songs together. That's that's a really important thing that it's never been released in its entirety, and I'm still wondering why. You know, the first recording with Dale at Reciprocal, I think it's I think it's worthy for a release. I'm gonna see Chris next month, so maybe I'll mention that to him, and he probably doesn't care. You know, he doesn't really like to talk. When I see him, I don't talk about Nirvana. Anyway, all right.